This just in on CBS Sports HQ, JJ Redick officially being introduced as the 29th head coach of the Lakers. Here's Redick alongside Rob Pelinka.
Appreciate it. This process has been surreal, to say the least. One of the things that kept coming up during the process with Rob, we kept talking about the word gratitude. And I think that's where I'll start, is just feeling so grateful for Rob, Jeannie, the entire Lakers organization for entrusting me in this position. And I take this responsibility very seriously. I have never coached in the NBA before. I don't know if you guys have heard that. My motivations for doing this, it starts with a very simple foundation of service. I think about the greatest moments, especially towards the end of my career, was about helping players. And so it starts with the desire to serve players, to serve the Lakers organization, to serve our fans. It's also about competition and performance, collaboration, leadership. These are the things that drive me. And they will all be important as I build out my staff, as we think about the people we want to draft and get in free agency, and as we think about player development. It's all about those things. When I think about the NBA today, you know, the game is evolving, and it's evolving fast. And one of the things in coaching that I think you have to be is adaptable. You have to be adaptable to your roster. You have to be adaptable in game planning against your opponent. And that's one of the things I really will strive to be. Lastly, I just want to say, like, sitting in this seat, I know what the expectations are. Lakers fans have some of the most passionate fans around the world, and the expectation is a championship. And so it's my job, it's our staff's job, it's Rob's job, it's all of us to deliver a championship caliber team. That's what I signed up for.
Hey, JJ, Mike Trudell with the Lakers and Spectrum Sportsnet. Amongst the things you were alluding to, just your personality, the competitiveness, Rob spoke about this, that drive. As a player, did you start to think about head coaching in that context, like the closest that you can get to fueling that, finding that competitive fire, and did that drive you at all towards this Lakers position?
There were certainly coaches that I had throughout my career that would say, you're going to coach someday. Doc was probably the first one that did that, but it was really when I was in Dallas at the end of my career, and I was hurt for most of those 2.5 months. I didn't play a lot. Rick Carlisle and I spent a lot of time together, and he really planted the seed about coaching. Now, at the time, I knew I was going to retire. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I wanted to be able to be home for a little bit. I didn't think it was the right time. You know, when I retired, and literally, when I retired, my performance coach and I, we talked about all the things that I loved about being a player. And it was a lot of those qualities that I just listed. And it's all part of coaching. And, you know, as I think about the culture we want to create here, part of that is just a competitive culture. Like, we want to come in every day thinking about competition.
JJ, Jim Hill, KCAL 9 News, congratulations. You mentioned what you learned from Doc Rivers. What's the most important thing you learned from Doc that's going to help you to make an adjustment into the NBA with no previous head coaching experience?
The most important thing I learned from Doc, you know, it's interesting because I probably took something from every coach that I ever played for. You know, Doc was such a good motivator. And one of the things that I think he is particularly good at is creating a vision, communicating a vision, and then getting you to buy into that vision day after day. Now, those Clippers teams, we didn't reach our ultimate vision, unfortunately, but that's something that he was always so great at. He's an incredible communicator.
Welcome, JJ. Rob, good to see you. If I could ask one of you both. Rob, obviously in today's media landscape, the twists and turns of a coaching search kind of become public fodder. Can you speak on, you guys are obviously very ecstatic to have JJ in this role, but there was a pursuit of Dan Hurley before, and just where did things stand? Did you put the JJ process on hold in that moment, and just how did that play out?
Yeah, happy to talk more about the entire process at another time. Today's sort of JJ's day, and I will say this. From the start, he was in our plan A pool of coaches that we were really interested in exploring. And I think the most important thing is throughout the process, JJ and I had direct and sort of constant communication to keep each other in the loop with what he was going through with his previous job with the NBA Finals. And I was keeping him abreast of the search. And I think sometimes before a partnership is forged, when you can have real, honest conversations before you actually become partners, it solidifies the relationship. And I think looking back to how transparent we were with one another, even in the midst of stuff going on in the media, I think it actually solidified our confidence and belief in working together.
And JJ, to retire after a long, successful career, a lot of athletes, it's a tough transition. You were able to quickly parlay that into a successful podcast venture, obviously broadcasting the NBA Finals. With that going in your direction, like that could have been what you did the next 20 years. Why did you decide that coaching was what you wanted to do in your basketball life?
I'll answer the question in a second. I want to follow up on something Rob just was talking about, and that's, when the process was going on and we first met in Chicago, I was getting ready to call Game 1 of the NBA Finals when the Dan Hurley news broke, and Rob was quick to call me. We had a great conversation during that whole 4-day period. Like, at no point was my ego or feelings hurt or bruised in any way. Dan Hurley is a 2-time national champion at UConn. I am a 2-time 55 Swiss League champion in the 3rd and 4th grade division. Like, I understood, I understood. It's funny because, Dave, I get that question all the time, and I've certainly gotten that question a lot from people that I trust and confide in over the last year. It was really after I interviewed for the Toronto job last year that I knew that I wanted to be a head coach in the NBA. And so the last year, I spent a lot of time talking to coaches, talking with GMs, picking their brains. I am very fortunate that I have a small circle of people that are currently working in the NBA that I am friends with, that I can confide in, that can help me. And the further I got into those conversations, the further I got into my own sort of journaling about coaching, thinking about it, envisioning it. Rob and I talked about this a ton. I just felt like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I mean, again, I brought it up. Like, I have 0 coaching experience in the NBA, but I would argue that I'm very experienced. And it started 22 years ago when I went to Duke, and I got to play for Coach K for 4 years, spent 15 years as a player. Honestly, the last 3 years have been invaluable in preparing me for this moment. Being able to connect to players, talking to them on the podcast, being in coaching interviews with ESPN, calling games, analyzing the game in 3 different formats. All of that has helped prepare me to be an NBA head coach.
Rob, JJ, over here, Dan Wakey with the LA Times. Yes. Questions for both of you guys. JJ first. How do you kind of envision, I think Jovan wrote something about Anthony Davis and kind of using him. How do you envision kind of Anthony Davis and LeBron James here as part of this team, provided LeBron resigns? And then Rob, for you, how are you going to sort of thread the needle of the late stage of potentially LeBron's career with the transition into whatever's next?
I think the first thing is with any player, Anthony Davis, LeBron James, Austin Reeves, any player on the roster. I can have a vision for how I want to use them, but there has to be buy-in and collaboration, right? So I can sit up here and tell you how I would like for them to play, but if there's no buy-in, then it doesn't really matter. So I think part of the next 2 months, and I know those guys are going to be busy with Team USA, part of the next 2 months is just having conversations. And Anthony and I already had a conversation a week ago about some ideas, both offensively and defensively. And I think both of us felt really comfortable going forward with that sort of as the base starting point of how he's going to play on this team. And one of the things I brought up with him is just the idea of him as a hub. There's a bunch of guys at the 5 position in the NBA that sort of operate in that way, and I don't know that he's been used in that way and sort of maximize all of his abilities. So that's a simple thing with him. With LeBron, look, you have to certainly get buy-in and talk to him about how he wants to play. Him and I have joked about this, but like, he shot over 40% from 3 this year. Like, I want him shooting threes. He's going to have his 3 or 4 bursts every game where he gets out in transition and does things that no one at his age should ever be able to do, but he does it. It's really just figuring out in the half court, putting him in different spots, both as a scorer and a facilitator. That'll be part of the conversation over the next couple months.
Yeah, I think first we want to respect and honor LeBron's ability on June 29th to make a decision about his contract. He has a player option, as we all know. So definitely we'll give him that time to go through that decision. But I will say, if he does return to the Lakers, the proof of concept in having 2 all-pro players as the core pieces of your team has worked for us to the highest level, of course, in 2020. But if those 2 players are at the core of what you're building, we'd like our chances. And of course, we'll continue to have conversations as we approach free agency here in the next week or so of how we want to tweak or make roster changes to put ourselves in a competitive position built around those 2 players.
Hey Rob, JJ over here. Yovan Buha with The Athletic. First for JJ, how have you gone about preparing for this position, especially kind of through the interview process, and then how have you gone about developing your coaching philosophies?
Again, it goes back to sort of how I answered Dave's question. Some of my coaching philosophies lie in the different roles I've had post-retirement. I think a big thing for me is you have to look at your roster, and then you have to figure out how you can create margins with that roster. And this roster, let's say last season, they did a good job of not fouling and getting to the line. They did a good job of creating a margin with fast break points and points in the paint. When I think about that with this team, it was like, how do we generate good threes? How do we generate more of that? Defensively, how do we scheme better? How do we turn the ball over less? Like, all these little margins, right? The team was 29th in offensive rebounding percentage. If you look at the trends of the NBA right now, teams that really value possessions are sending guys from the corner. They're not worried about getting 3 guys back. I mean, when I played, you were either a go guy or get back guy. I think giving them, especially from the corners, to crash is huge. You can create a margin there. That all came from just analyzing the game over the last 3 years. Philosophically, culturally, again, those are all based on experiences. When I think about culture, the foundation of it has to be competition. There has to be joy in it, though. Like, the pursuit of greatness can't be miserable. Every day that somebody walks in this building, they have to enjoy it. I think part of being a coach, right, is like, can I maximize each player? That helps maximize the group. And does everybody in the building, not just the players and staff, does everybody in the building enjoy coming to work every day? That's sort of on me to create that culture.
And then
If you're just joining us here on HQ, that is the Lakers introducing JJ Redick as their next head coach. And we have our NBA insider, Bill Ryder, here with us to discuss. And Bill, I want to get your takeaways because JJ certainly brought the jokes there saying, hey, I don't know if you guys have heard, but I don't have any head coaching experience. He talked a lot about his plans with LeBron, AD, the whole Danny Hurley of it all. But what were your biggest takeaways from some of those comments there?
Yeah, Jacqueline, that he's not a stand-up comedian. That's okay. Neither am I. Neither are a lot of us. That's not the job that he's hired for. I thought it was really interesting and insightful, and it leaves me that press conference with the exact same perspective that I think a lot of us have about JJ Redick. A big question mark with a high ceiling and a pretty low floor. I thought his answers on basketball toward the end there in particular were really interesting, and the notion and the concept, and he can really speak to this as a player, that he is going to go in as a head coach who wants to be collaborative. And he's really saying, I think, Jacqueline, collaborative with stars like Anthony Davis and LeBron James and work on a plan together. I think that bodes well. I think with his lack of coaching experience and his obvious relationship with LeBron James, that's going to be really important. I will say this, and I'm playing armchair psychologist here like everybody else watching the press conference. I thought he was a little sensitive maybe to more pretty straightforward questions. There is certainly one of the concerns out there is that JJ Redick, smart though he is, impressive though he is, can be a little sensitive to criticism. And I thought those jokes there, trying to get ahead of it, spoke to that a little bit. But my overall impression was very smart guy, very charismatic guy, loves the game, and going to be curious and fascinated to see how that translates or doesn't translate to coaching this Lakers team.
Yeah, something I thought was interesting. We know he had this, long 15-year career in the NBA. And then, of course, the last 3 years were him as a podcast host and analyst. And he sort of talked about how that would help him as a coach, being able to call the game and seeing it from that sense. I thought that was interesting, Bill.
I did too. And, there's only a handful of guys who have been players, have had no experience coaching, and have made that transition to being a head coach, Jacqueline. It's 5 or 6 people. And if you narrow that list down to folks who have done that and also had some broadcasting experience, one of the few names on that list other than JJ Redick now is Steve Kerr. And Steve Kerr will tell you, and people in other sports will tell you, that sometimes the ability to see a game, in this case basketball, from a perspective that you've never seen it from before, to have a lifetime immersed for JJ Redick in hoops, but maybe to see it from a different dimension, a different angle, because he is broadcasting. As he noted, he's breaking down games where he was from three different mediums. That can have a huge advantage. It can help you see some things maybe other people don't see. And I'm with you, Jacqueline. It was a really interesting point. Steve Kerr is a small sample size, but it is certainly an example that has worked out. And so if you're a JJ Redick optimist, if you think that he has the tools, both as a would-be head coach and just the players on this roster, maybe the time that he spent the last few years analyzing the game, coupled with his playing career, is going to work. It certainly, I thought, was impressive at times in that press conference as he talked about that.
Bill, something else that's just an added layer here is, of course, and you mentioned it as well, his relationship with LeBron James. They have this podcast together. You mentioned him wanting to kind of collaborate with LeBron and AD as a head coach. This is going to be LeBron's 10th head coach that he's had in his career. I don't know if there's any official word on this podcast, if it's still going to go on, but how do you handle that dynamic, like with LeBron James, arguably the biggest superstar that's still in the game, and then his head coach having a podcast every single week after games after they lose? Like, what do you think that's going to look like?
There is no official word yet. If I were advising JJ Redick in terms of what is in JJ Redick's best interest and the Lakers' best interest, Jacqueline, I would say you got to squash the podcast. Now, if we're talking about you and me and everyone else in the media, I hope they do it because the content will be amazing. It'll be a live check-in. I think the way that you manage LeBron James, and really the situation, not even manage LeBron, manage the relationship you clearly have with LeBron James, and the perception that is out there and that exists both outside of the Lakers and within the dynamics of that team and that organization. I think it's the right perception that LeBron got JJ Redick the job, that JJ Redick got the job because of, or in large part because of his relationship with LeBron. The way you manage that is you make other people feel comfortable. And the main person there is Anthony Davis. There's been some talk in the Lakers organization. There were some worries, I was told last week, that Anthony Davis was just not opposed to it, just a little worried about LeBron's guy coming in, and would he have an equal amount of the confidence and faith in the game plan built around him from LeBron's handpicked coach and JJ Redick. And you heard JJ, I think, address it there. And the politics are smart. He said that he talked to Anthony Davis about a week ago, which is interesting because he had not as we understand it, had not accepted the job at that point. So that was a vetting process maybe for AD. And he made a point when asked about LeBron to say with players like Anthony Davis and players like LeBron James. So I think that's how you go about managing this attachment that we're going to have, this perspective we're going to have that JJ Redick is LeBron's head coach. You make Anthony Davis feel important. You talk about him a lot. You come to your introductory press conference and you bring him up even when you're not asked about Anthony Davis. You make sure AD buys in as much as LeBron, because if it's both superstars, that probably goes a long way, Jacqueline, to making sure the other players, the role players, Austin Reeves, the guys in between, say to themselves, okay, this is going to work. It's not just LeBron's guy. Let's go do this.
You know, when we were talking about this job opening, when it first came to fruition, it was like, how do you manage LeBron? And then also, how do you manage the expectations for this organization? And that is something that he touched on as well. He said, I know the expectation is a championship, but Bill, I want to ask you, in your opinion, what would be considered a win in year one under Redick? Is it just getting to the playoffs? Is it making a Western Conference final appearance? Is it an NBA Finals appearance? As lofty as that is, what would you be considering a win for JJ in year one?
If JJ Redick, Jacqueline, I think it's making a best-of-7 playoff series. So making most likely the route from the Lakers that's realistic is making the play-in again, and then winning that play-in situation, whether it's 1 or 2 games, to play in a best-of-7 series. I do not think it's even remotely realistic as this team is constructed, and it's almost certainly going to be constructed because of the new CBA rules. And you heard Rob Pelinka talk about the apron and the second apron. It's really hard to build out a team now and to have flexibility. And with this roster and this team, I think you make the playoffs. That's a successful start. And it's interesting because, again, he's trying to set expectations and manage this fan base. I thought he did a good job in the press conference. He said that a championship caliber team, well, you know, that's in some ways semantics. What does that mean? I mean, you can argue any team's a championship caliber team if they lose to the Denver Nuggets. But this is a Western Conference that's going to go 13 teams deep. This is a Lakers team that has not finished in the top 4 in a very, very, very long time. And if you take away the bubble season, which counts, 2020, you know, they made a conference finals a couple years ago, but they were swept by the Denver Nuggets. They have not looked at that level, at the level you need just to come close to competing for a championship. So I think, to answer your question, it's making the playoffs. But I don't know, Jacqueline, if that expectation, that realistic expectation, will fit the expectations of Jeannie Buss and Rob Pelinka and Lakers fans, who always look backwards as much as forwards when trying to figure out what they think they should do in any given season.